the fighting was done and the rebellion had been quashed. Why the Ironborn had thought they could match the combined forces of most of the Seven Kingdoms was a mystery to him. Did they really think that Robert's rule was that fragile? Did they not understand that with Stark and Arryn, Robert controlled 3 kingdoms, and with Cersei as his wife that gave him a 4th? Even if the Reach didn't join in, which they had, that alone was surely too many for a pile of rocks to handle. His father may have held back during Robert's rebellion, but he'd never hold back with his blood on the throne. Then just to poke the lion even more, they decided it was a good idea to attack Lannisport. Were they really that dumb? Evidently so, as now Balon Greyjoy sits a broken throne with 2 of his sons dead and the other to be a hostage to his good behavior. No doubt Robert would give that dubious honor to Stark, Jaime thought bitterly. Jaime had felt alive in the carnage of the fighting. It was the only thing that actually did make him feel anything since that day in the Red Keep. He had failed his prince that day, and no matter what he did since, that failure always kept coming back to him. "Look after my family, Jaime. Things will change when I return," Rhaegar had said. But Rhaegar hadn't returned, and Jaime could have never known that his father would sink so low. Before his thoughts could get the better of him once again, he was interrupted by a boy at his tent.
"Sir Jaime, the king wishes to speak to you,"
the boy said nervously. "Very well. I'll be there presently," Jaime replied. As he entered the king's tent, he could tell that this was no ordinary meeting. Eddard Stark sat there with the king, his usual serious expression showing on his long face. Wait, what was that look? Was that pity? Who the hell does he think he is to pity me? Jaime thought as he looked at the man. Oh! His anger threatened to rise, but before he could say anything, the king spoke very quietly and very unlike the jovial or even the angry Robert that he was used to. "There have been bad tidings from Harlow. I know no other way to say this other than to say it. Your father, he fell. Sir Jaime, he's gone," Robert said as he looked at him. The rest of the conversation had been a blur, and he wasn't sure if he heard anything after the news about his father. Tywin Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock, the Lion of Lannisport, fallen to a damn Ironborn Reaver. Surely this was wrong? Surely the messenger had been mistaken? Jaime clutched his chest, his breathing erratic, and then he fell down onto the ground and looked up to see Ned Stark above him offering him a hand. He brushed it away and forced himself to his feet, and as he turned to leave the tent, the king began to speak. "We need to," Robert began. "Not now, your grace," Stark said angrily, and for the first time, Jaime actually felt something other than contempt for the man. Later, as he sat in his tent, he felt more composed, or as much as he would be this day. He drank so many cups of water since he'd been told the news that he could now feel the results pushing against his bladder. So he walked outside to the nearest empty space and relieved the pressure, each drop making him more relaxed. He laughed at the absurdity of it all. Here he was pissing against the wind while his father lay dead miles away. What a waste, he thought as he placed his manhood back in his breeches. Heading back to his tent, the realization began to dawn on him. His father was gone, and yet where there should be sadness, he felt only relief. Oh, for sure there was pain mixed in there also, but surprisingly, the overriding emotion wasn't what it should have been. His father had been a monster. The events of the rebellion had proved that. And so Jaime barely mourned the man. Instead, it was the monster he thought of. The body was covered in blood, and the red Lannister banner covering it couldn't hide it all, but it was the 2 others that his eyes were focused on. Smaller, and yet equally blood-spattered children. They were only children. Jaime stopped, and the entire contents of his stomach emptied against the ground, though luckily he hadn't really eaten since he had heard the news of his father's death. As he reached his tent, the same small boy was standing there, no doubt bearing another message from the king.
"Sir Jaime,"
the boy began nervously. "Let me guess, the king wishes my presence once again. Very well, lead the way, young man," he said as he smiled at the boy, and they began to walk towards the king's tent. As before, when he entered, Ned Stark was again sitting to the right of the king, but the look in his eyes was different this time. What was it? Hope? No, it wasn't hope. Relief. Was it relief? No, not that either. Whatever it was, Jaime didn't get the time to figure it out, as once again the king began to speak to him. "Ha, Sir Jaime, it's good to see you're feeling better," the king said, smiling at him. Feeling better? Was he a moron? Did he think he was sick? His father had been killed, and this was the best this idiot could come up with as a greeting. Jaime noticed that even Stark was looking at him incredulously as Robert continued to speak. We have much to discuss, Casterly Rock for one, and we shall need a new Warden of the West. It seems your time in my Kingsguard is at an end, Sir Jaime, Robert said, and Jaime felt his breath catch in his throat at the thoughts of what that could mean. The road to Winterfell was rough, and the terrain dreary, but Jaime found that he didn't mind either of those things. He actually quite liked the peacefulness and the empty spaces of the north. Besides, compared to the grey waste that was the Iron Islands, anything was an improvement. It had been less than 2 moons since his life had changed irrevocably, and he was still coming to terms with the new reality he found himself in. He probably should have headed home with the rest of the Westerland's forces, considering he was their new warden. But the thoughts of having to see his father's body and the inevitable looks he'd have faced from the Lords of the West was something he wasn't ready for just yet. So, to Winterfell, it was that he found himself heading. He'd been surprised when Stark had asked if he wished to accompany the king, surprised even more when for some reason he had agreed. Thank you, Lord Stark. I think I will, he said, and he enjoyed the stunned expression on the wolf's face. They were to stay in Winterfell for only a short time, Jaime thinking that it would be a boon to Stark having the king in his keep, or at least the man would see it as such. From there, it was on to White Harbor and home, and once there, his father's body was to be laid to rest in the Hall of Heroes beside his forefathers. He had already written to Tyrion to explain what had happened, telling his brother that he would return soon and that he was sorry that he couldn't come back more quickly. He could have, of course, but for some reason, he wished to go to Winterfell. What a strange world we live in, he said aloud, and to the bemusement of the 2 guards that were riding nearest to him. As they crested a hill, the keep came into view. It was large and grey, but still very impressive. The walls and towers looked ancient but sturdy, and it would take a lot to see this keep fall, Jaime thought. He looked to the front of the procession to see Stark and the king laughing and joking with one another. Just kiss already, he thought as a smile appeared on his face. As they entered the castle, he saw what must have been every single resident awaiting their liege lord and king, and almost as one they dropped to their knees. Winterfell is yours, my lord, and yours, your grace, the young man said, stumbling over his words. He looked as uncomfortable as could be, and the long, serious face of the Starks was clearly evident, marking him out as Stark's brother or so Jaime believed. Don't these people ever smile, Jaime thought, before the man who had spoken then showed that he actually could. Benjen, it's good to see you, brother. Jaime heard Stark say, and he watched as the 2 brothers embraced, his thoughts going to his own little brother who was alone in Casterly Rock, and again Jaime promised himself he'd see Tyrion soon. Rise, all of you, and welcome your lord home. We dealt the squids a mighty defeat, and your lord was at the very heart of it, the king said, his voice booming across the courtyard. He looked on as the king then moved to a woman who was torn between looking at him and at Stark. The lady was the latter's wife, obviously, pretty enough for a trout, Jaime thought as he looked at the exchange between the woman and the king. Cat, you look as beautiful as ever, Robert said, and the tall, auburn-headed woman blushed as the king kissed her hand. And this must be your boy. A fine warden of the north he'll make one day, won't you, lad? The king said as he brushed his hand on the shoulder of a young, auburn-headed boy, while his mother looked on proudly. Your grace, my lord, perhaps we should take this inside. The weather seems about to turn, the lady said as she turned to the small little girl beside her. She too was auburn-headed like her mother.
Sansa, won't you say hello to your father?
Stark's wife said, and the girl shyly looked up her father before yelping in joy as Stark pulled her up and swung her around. A little girl's laughter rang out around the courtyard, and once again Jaime was in place he wished not to be. Where's Balerion, princess? He's hiding, father. Oh, shall we find him then? No, father, no tickles. He felt the tears welling in his eyes, and so he quickly turned around and walked to his horse, hoping that no one had seen his face as he did so. Later, as he was escorted to his room, Jaime noticed a small, dark-haired boy swinging a sword against a straw dummy. His form was terrible, but the strength he was showing was surprising. though he quickly realized that the boy was angry and was taking it out on the nearest available object. "Keep your chin up, boy," Jaime said, and for a second he thought he saw purple in the boy's eyes. But it was brief, and he felt he was mistaken, as instead when he looked again it was a grey-eyed boy that looked back at him. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean any offense," the boy said as he dropped the wooden sword and sloped off towards the stables. "Don't worry, lad. None was given," Jaime said, but the boy was already out of sight. The feast that night was a dull affair. The Northerners had a different way of feasting than those in the South, and the king was in his usual boisterous mood. Robert, as always, was manhandling serving girls and getting drunker by the second. The only satisfaction that Jaime got was in seeing Stark's disapproval now aimed at someone other than him. That, and seeing his wife sitting beside him with a thunderous look on her face. Surprisingly, though, it didn't seem to be the king's behavior that was causing that look. Instead, it was focused on something at the back of the hall, or more precisely, someone. The boy from earlier sat there amongst what appeared to be the servants and guards. He was laughing at something one of them was saying when he looked to the high table. As soon as he did so, the smile stopped, and a look of seriousness that stirred something in Jaime quickly took over his features instead. Where have I seen that look before? Who is this boy? Jaime thought, and so he decided to look more closely at the lad, only for a loud bang at the front of the hall to grab his and everyone else's attention. "Well, help me, damn you," Robert said angrily, and both Trant and Blount moved quickly to pick the drunken king up from the floor. These were his former sworn brothers, and this is what the King's Guard had become, little more than arse-wipers to a drunken king. Jaime turned his attention from the fat oaf to search for the boy once again, only to find his seat empty. Where had he gone? He wondered. And so he got up from his seat and left in search of him, as his curiosity got the better of him. It didn't take too long to find him, as there he was once again with his sword in his hand and beating the hell out of a new straw dummy. "Your form is terrible," Jaime said as the boy turned to face him. "Sir, the boy stuttered, and so he smiled, trying to put him at ease. "Lord Jaime Lannister," he said, and the boy frowned when he heard his name. "Damn it," Jaime thought, and then he shrugged as he spoke again. "Would you like some pointers, lad?" he asked, and finally received a shy smile from the boy. "Yes, sir, I mean my lord," the boy said eagerly. For the next couple of hours, they went through stances, footwork, and forms, and the boy proved to be a quick study. Quicker than most boys of an age much older than he was, and Jaime found himself impressed with the raw talent the lad possessed. "What's your name, lad?" he asked, and the boy's face suddenly darkened. Jon Snow, my lord," the boy said, and Jaime realized why he was being so hesitant. The boy was a bastard. But more than that, this was the boy that had stained the honorable cloak of Eddard Stark, and that was not an easy thing to live up or down to. "Well, you've got talent, young man. If you keep it up, you'll be an excellent swordsman one day," Jaime said, and the smile the boy gave him was blinding and familiar. No, it couldn't be, Jaime thought as he looked more closely at him. As before, though the boy quickly sloped away and Jaime was left standing there alone, wondering if he'd truly just seen a ghost, or if it was a trick of the light. The dreams came to him again that night as he slept in his bed, the bodies once again being placed before the throne. "I see no babes, only dragon spawn," the king said, almost reveling in the desecration in front of him. "Sir Jaime, have you seen Balerion?" the little girl asked. "Wah!" Mother said I'm not to let Balerion near Egg, but Egg wants to meet her. Look after my children. Sir Jaime, things will change when I return. A silver prince said, "Please, Sir Jaime, you have to help us away from here. My children and I aren't safe with Aerys," a princess said pleadingly. "Now, Egg, Mother says you're not allowed to play with Balerion, Sir Jaime. Sir Jaime, I found him. He was hiding all the time," the little girl said, laughing. The smile on her face was blinding as she showed off the cat in her arms. Jaime woke up in a cold sweat. It was the same smile. It was Rhaenys' smile. He got out of bed and threw some water on his face, the coldness a welcome respite from the thoughts that were running through his head. The boy was a Targaryen. He had to be, but how? Jaime began to play the events of the rebellion back in his head. Stark had left after arguing with the king. He had stood up for Elia and her children and had called it out for what it was, murder. Then he left to lift the siege at Storm's End. Then what? Damn it. Why couldn't he remember? He quickly got dressed. It was early, but perhaps breaking his fast would clear the confusion from his head and allow him to figure this out, or so he hoped. As he sat down to eat the honey-covered porridge, he smiled. Savages. The Northerners may be, but this was certainly the only dignified way to start the day in this cold land, each bite making him feel better. After he was finished eating, he went outside to the training area, a part of him hoping to see the boy again, though he knew it was too early and that he was alone. Jaime picked up a sword and began going through his motions, feeling the calmness come over him as he always did when he did this. After a few moments, he turned to put the sword back down when he noticed the boy. He'd been watching him for some time and was mimicking his movements as best he could, and it made him smile to see just how close he came to copying them precisely. "What brings you out so early, young man?" Jaime asked, the boy shooting him a surprised look at the sound of his voice. Nothing. My lord, I was just watching," the boy said nervously. "You were doing more than watching. You were copying and doing a damn good job of it," Jaime said, and the guilty look on the boy's face quickly became something different. Was that pride? It was. Good. He was right to feel pride. 6 name days old, and he was already showing more promise than boys twice his age. "My lord, those moves, why'd you do them?" the boy asked, and the question caught him off guard for a moment. "Why do you think?" he asked, watching as the boy pondered the question before answering. "Because the more you do them, the easier they are. Then doing them feel easy, and it calms you down," the boy said, surprising Jaime that he had understood it so quickly. Jaime looked at the lad more keenly, closer than he had before, and he could see it clearly then. The shape of the nose, the cheekbones, the purple in the eyes when the light hit them a certain way, it all became clear. Jon Snow was Rhaegar's son, and that could only mean that Lyanna Stark was his mother. "Yes, lad, well done, that's exactly why. Would you like to practice some more with me?" he asked, and there it was, that blinding smile appearing on the boy's face once again. They practiced for a couple of hours, and at some point, the auburn-headed boy who was Stark's heir turned up. "What are you doing, Snow? That's the Kingslayer," the boy said, and Jaime grimaced. "Lord Jaime was teaching me swords. He's really good," Jon said, and Jaime found he couldn't help but smile at the earnest way he said it. "Whatever," the heir said dismissively as he turned around and headed back towards the keep. "Don't mind him. He's not a morning person," Jon said as he turned to face him. The boy was still smiling as they continued their moves and even began to have a mock spar. Later on, after they had parted, Jaime went back and sat in his room, his thoughts focused only on Jon Snow and the rebellion. Stark had broken the siege at Storm's End and had then gone to Dorne. He returned with his sister's body and a babe he named his bastard. No one had questioned it, because if the great and honorable Ned Stark was claiming a stain on his damnable honor, then it must be true. But what had really happened? Was the boy even a bastard? He needed to know, and Jaime knew that he had no other choice. He needed to go and speak with Eddard Stark. Mind made up, he left his room and headed towards the Great Hall. While he was on his way there, he heard a raised voice, and so he stopped to listen. "Boy, what were you doing with Lord Jaime? A bastard like you shouldn't be near their betters. I'll not have shame brought upon my family by the likes of you," the woman said, and Jaime could hear the sniffles as if he was standing right beside the boy. "From now on, I don't want to see you anywhere near any of the noble lords. It's enough. I am forced to tolerate your presence. I won't inflict it upon those better than you." "By the Seven, what would they think of us?" the woman said as she turned to walk away before Jaime managed to round the corner. Jon sat there on the ground with tears rolling down his face, and as much as he wanted to go to him, Jaime knew that he'd be embarrassed to be found in such a state. "I'm sorry, I won't do it again," Jon said between his sniffles, and Jaime found that he was suddenly very angry and annoyed about the boy's treatment. He turned away to go and look for Stark and hoped he kept his temper in check. It took him almost the entire rest of the day to get a moment to talk to Stark, as it seemed that he and the king were practically joined at the hip. Jaime had always heard that Lyanna was the great love of the king's life, but the more he saw of him and Stark together, the more he thought that perhaps Eddard was the Stark that Robert truly loved. Finally, he found the man alone, and so he moved to speak to him. Lord Stark, may I have a moment of your time when you're ready? He asked, as Stark looked at him with his annoyance clear in his face. I'm very busy, Lord Lannister, Stark said, and Jaime had to resist the urge to call him out for his kissing of the king's arse, though he supposed in its own way that was busy work, as Robert was now a far larger man than he had once been. I wish to speak with you about your son, Jaime said, and Stark's annoyance turned to confusion now. Robb, why would you want to speak to me about Robb? Stark asked, and Jaime almost laughed, as of course he'd think it was the heir he wished to speak on. Especially considering he was his only son, if Jaime was as right as he now believed himself to be. No, not Robb. I wish to speak about Jon, he said, and he watched as the color drained from Stark's face. Very well. How about we meet in my solar in an hour, Lord Lannister? Stark asked, and Jaime agreed before he turned and walked away.